Good evening. This is Father Fred again. I'm pleased to be at my 80-acre tract that I bought near Big Bend National Park in a development called Terlingua Ranch. Right now behind me you're looking at the Chizos Mountains in Big Bend National Park. My son-in-law Jim Hull, who's with me now, and my daughter Diane, his wife, we've climbed that Chizos Mountain trail several times and camped out up on the top, which is called the Rim. It's a beautiful place to camp out. We've backpacked up there a number of times. And now, if Diane will swing the camera around, I'll show you in the distance there is Terlingua Ranch Lodge, nestled against those mountains. And we've got our RVs there right now at the hookups they have for RVs. And sooner or later we're going to have hookups here on this property. And now, Diane, if you'll swing on around, we'll show the mountains that are on my 80 acres here behind us. And there's their daughter Monica. She's mapping out a trail up to Meditation Mountain up there at the back part of my property that I purchased. And we've just bulldozed a new road up there and a couple of RV sites. Can you show those, Diane?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then we're going to swing on around to some of the other mountains that border our property here at Terlingua Ranch. They're quite rugged and quite picturesque. And you can see some of our neighbors' houses as we swing around back to the Chizos Mountains. It's quite a sweeping panorama of West Texas desert mountains. We're in the Chihuahuan Desert of far west Texas, and this desert extends all the way into northern Mexico. It's one of the largest deserts in North America. Well, today we've had last week we had the beginning of Lent on Wednesday, and of course it was freezing cold in this part of Texas at that time. I got down to 5 degrees in Bernie, where I live. So as Epiphany season ends and Lent begins, we can talk about a word that I love: transfiguration. Remember that Jesus was transfigured up on the mountain with Peter and James and John in attendance up on the mountaintop. And in this place, this holy place, they saw Jesus talking with God the Father. I've often loved being up on mountains because I thought I would be closer to God, and here I am finally at age 82 in a mountain area where I feel at home. When I was 5 years old, as World War II was coming to an end, I got my cousins finally to hike with me up Franklin Mountain in El Paso. My mother and little sister and I were living in El Paso at the end of the war. Actually, I was 6 years old. At the church we attended, the Sunday school class had a coloring book of Moses on the mountain, and that was my favorite part of that coloring book: Moses climbing the mountain. God was in the cloud, and Moses stood tall, holding the tablets of the 10 Commandments and talking with God. I wanted to do that. I wanted to climb Mount Franklin there in El Paso and talk to God. Finally, my older cousins agreed to take me on a hike to the top of the mountain. We left early and reached the top by 10 a.m. It was fabulous to look down upon El Paso and Juarez, see the buildings. And as you looked around, you could see the big army post, Fort Bliss, where my grandfather had died in 1916 from heart trouble, and where my father had been stationed before he went overseas to the South Pacific to fight. Well, I stood there hoping that I could talk to God, but I wasn't having much luck. It was getting hot. My cousins were ready to go home. They said, well, okay, Freddie, we got to go home. And I said, not yet. I begged. I haven't talked to God. They finally convinced me that God was probably on a mountain in the South Pacific, protecting my father from Japanese bullets. When the war ended, my father returned, and we moved to a place where there were no mountains, Houston. Luckily, we moved to a house that had a big oak tree in front. I climbed that tree many times in my pursuit of talking to God. Sometimes when I got real quiet, I felt that God was there up in the upper reaches of that tree. But I couldn't hold on to the elusive presence longer than a fleeting moment. Richard Foster says that as we pursue God on our upward journey of faith, we must come to the point where we listen, really listen. We listen with the mind, the heart, the spirit, the bones and muscle and sinew. The goal, of course, is to bring this stance of listening prayer into the course of our everyday experiences. Why should you and I listen for God so intently? Because God tells us to listen. When Jesus was transfigured with fiery light on that mountaintop, God spoke. God said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." For an elusive moment, the world stood still and listened. When God told Peter and James and John to listen to Jesus, he had you and I in mind also. The bright light of his Spirit was being passed on to them, so that after Jesus' death and resurrection, they were to spread that light to new disciples and grow the church. Their spiritual journey has become our spiritual journey. Paul, in an epistle, says, "Now the Lord is the Spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." And all of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. A great saint of the early church, Gregory of Nyssa, compared the spiritual journey to a race. What kind of race is your spiritual journey? A sprint? A marathon? A downhill coast? An uphill climb? Who cheered you along the way? Who are you cheering along the way right now? After I finished my first Houston marathon, I put on my sweats and went back to the finish line. I was surprised to see that I hadn't been last. There were still a bunch of people finishing, and they all looked as pitiful as I felt. Every aching muscle in my body reached out to them. We had reached our goal after many months of hard work and dedicated training. Self-denial and conditioning is not easy. The Bible calls upon us to exercise our faith, to go into training for our spiritual journey. This Lent, we might exercise our faith by careful listening to Jesus, who sacrificed everything for us. As we listen, we might make our first exercise some healthy self-denial by deliberately placing the needs and interests of those around us ahead of our own interests. In other words, we go beyond mere intentions. The more fitting image, says Richard Foster, is of an athlete who enters a training program appropriate for the development of mind, body, and spirit. We, like the athlete, must experience self-denial as a normal part of our training regimen so that we may press on toward the goal of the prize of the heavenly call of God in Jesus Christ. As the season of Epiphany began, we read that God's voice was heard at Jesus' baptism, announcing that God was well pleased with his Son, Jesus. Now, as we've ended Epiphany, we experience God in all of his glory and Jesus in this preview of the resurrection. Jesus is on fire on the mountaintop with the glory of God. In the Old Testament, God's glory was called the Shekinah, and it had always struck fear into the Israelites. It meant that God would dwell among them, and they were afraid of that awesome presence. But Jesus gives us a new way of seeing God and experiencing his presence. Matthew, in his gospel, adds the following insight to our transfiguration story. He says, when the disciples heard this, that is God's voice, they were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them and said, "Get up and do not be afraid." They were free and we are free to share the transfiguration glory with others. Nelson Mandela said, "We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." Jesus liberated his disciples on that day of transfiguration to follow him without fear. And when he died and was resurrected, they became the bearers of God's glory to bring the dwelling place of God into the hearts of all people. Today we joyfully celebrate this transfiguration together. Thank you for being with me today. God bless you.
Okay, we're here now, Elaine, and there's Fred, your dad. He was standing right here, and I wanted to make sure we got more of the Chisos in. So here's the panorama, and Monica's coming around. Right here. Diane, right here, come on. Wave to the camera.
Hi.
Hallelujah. Have a good Lent.